Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back for our 12 Nay Q&A Part 3. This is the uh, Q&A series that celebrates the fact that this channel is not at 12,000 subscribers and never will be. And we are up to Anastasia B. Dear Steve, congratulations on 12K, or not. It's not. I think in your video on literary fiction, when talking about Half of the Yellow Sun, you mentioned that there were many other excellent examples of African literature on the same topic. Could you recommend some of them? Thank you very much, as always. I could. Yes, there are quite a few. I couldn't do them in a Q&A, but I could definitely make a video on contemporary African and African American and immigrant experience literature. There's quite a bit of it that's good. In my literary fiction tag, I concentrate on what's bad, but I can concentrate on what's good as well. And I love on that tag how easy it is to spot the people who just came to my channel for that tag and were watching that tag, and the only thing that they could say is, "Oh my God, it's so racist." That's the only thing they could say. There's no racism anywhere in the video, but it was the only thing they could say, because they've never had a conversation, they've never watched any conversations. In the comment section of that video, it is so easy to tell the people who've watched this channel for a while versus the people who only saw that video. But anyway, the Peglar paper says, "Hey Steve, would you have any advice and any book recommendations for aspiring editors?" I don't think I know. I know all sorts of editor memoirs, but they're not how-to. They're not going to help you with any kind of advice. I don't know what the advice would be, except the old way, which would be to attach yourself to some journal or publication, whether it's your local newspaper, if they run original content, or the nearest big newspaper that does, or a literary journal that's small, or a literary journal that's not small, and you just be really persistent. Not as an editor, but as a writer. You're no good as an editor on a literary journal. I'm assuming you mean as a literary journal here. I would have no ability to talk about any other kind of editor. You're no good as a literary editor of any kind if you don't know how to write. So you would start at that journal, you would approach them and say, "I would love to write a book review." Usually that's the way in. "I'd love to write a book review," or help out with any other editorial stuff that needs to be done. But that question usually goes nowhere because there are already people there that do that sort of stuff. The chances of you finding a journal that has somebody leaving and you're just the person for it are better to say, "I'd like to write, and then I'd like to write again. This was a lot of fun. Take your edits, take them meekly, meet your deadlines, don't ever miss them, be cheerful in conversation, don't ever turn down work." All that sort of stuff. You do that, you keep getting work, and then maybe after a year or two, you say, I've been doing all this work, all this freelance work for whatever the journal is. I'd love to work for the journal. Are there any editorial positions open? An assistant editorship, something like that. That used to be the way to do it. You would get that, you would show up, you would work, you would do the work, you would never complain, you would never be late, you would never leave early, you would never say no. And after a few more years of that, a higher editorial position would be available and you would be the first in line. That used to be the way how that was done. I don't know how it's done nowadays at all. So I'd have no advice on the subject whatsoever, which is kind of odd since I did just become a book section editor again, but I did it basically that way. So my own advice is that. Vera Pavlova says, "Where do I sign up for that medical exam of yours where I surrender my free will and hand over my reading to you?" Simply have to email me. We'll start an email conversation. That's the way it goes. We can't meet in person, or I'd have you over here for Wine and Calzones. We'd talk books. By the time that first evening of Wine and Calzones was over, and Frida was done screaming at you and cuddling with you, and you staggered out the door into a lift to go on your way, after that very first evening, I would know enough to never lead you wrong again in the rest of your living days when it comes to books. And I've had people take me up on that offer. Whether they were customers who walked into Barnes & Noble. Over the years, I worked in a retail bookstore for 25 years. I would have a customer come in and say, "Where is such and such a book? Can you take me to it?" And I would say, "Sure thing." And I'd just chat about the weather or about dogs or whatnot. And if the customer asked, "Did you read this book?" I would say yes, and nothing more. And if the customer then said, "What did you think of it?" I'd say, "Well, okay, if you ask me what I think of it, I'm going to tell you, even though we're almost there." And I'd say, a lot of times customers, that got their attention because that's not typical clerk behavior. And I'd say, "Okay, so go ahead and tell me." And I'd say, "It was terrible. There are a number of reasons why it was terrible. You will notice those reasons. You will have to overlook them in order to like it." Sometimes, by the time we got to the book, the customer would say, "Well, okay, I guess I don't want this then. It sounds like you could recommend something better. Can you recommend something better? If you are the manager of an investment firm in the business section of Boston and you come up the street to Barnes & Noble on your hour off for lunch and a clerk talks that way to you, you're used to making very clear-cut decisions like that. It's not going to take long for you to turn to that clerk and say, okay, it sounds like you don't like this book and have legitimate reason not to. Can you recommend something better? I'll walk out the door with it. My answer was always yes. Oftentimes, that person would come back and say, that recommendation you gave me was great. Can you do it again? My answer is yes, I can. I can do it again. The more I know about your reading taste, the more I can do it, until it's every book you read for the rest of your life. So get in touch. Happy to do it. I had many customers that did that. I also had customers who were hilariously stubborn, where they would come in and say, I want such and such a book, and we'd have that conversation. We'd get to the book, and by the time we got there, I told them all that was wrong with it. And they'd say, well, it's all subjective. I'm gonna take it anyway. I'm gonna try it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you. And then they'd come back 5 days later, and they'd say, this was terrible. And it was terrible for exactly the reasons that you said. And I would say, so maybe you won't tell me anymore that it's all subjective line? It'd be really nice if I never heard that again. And we'd crack up about it. And they'd say, I want a recommendation of yours. And I'd say, here you go. Take this book. And they would come back 5 days later and say, that was great. Now I have a book I'm looking for. And we go through it all again. I'd say, okay, well, I don't know where you got this recommendation from, but by sheer chance, this book you're looking for is terrible. And they would say, oh, no, not this again. I want to read it anyway. And they'd read it anyway. And they'd come back and say, that was terrible. I want you to recommend. I had customers go through that rigmarole all the time, even though they saw. Anyway, just get in touch. I'm here all the time. My email is on every video. Pamela Kennedy says, have you read... Oh, somewhere up in the wilds of Maine, my old friend Deb is going, ooh, she's feeling a crick in her neck. I don't know why people ask me this question. Why do people start questions to me with, have you ever read? Why do they do it? Why? Why do they do it? I read an average of 8 to 10 hours every day. I read an average of 150 pages an hour, and I have done both those things for the last 50 years. Count up how many books that is. And that's an average. There were plenty of times when it was more than that. Have you ever read the Regeneration Trilogy by Pat Barker? Yes, I have. Kim Esch says, I never see Pearl Buck discussed on YouTube. I loved The Wave as a child and The Good Earth as an adult. Are there other books of hers you can recommend? If not, please share your thoughts. Well, I've read everything by this author, but I can't recommend any of it. I'm glad that it works on you. I've known lots of people where it did, where they not only love Pearl Buck, but can't understand something that has been true for roughly 35 years, which is that nobody ever talks about her. Nobody ever talks about her books. I found them interesting and challengingly composed, but with no emotional content whatsoever. And I know that that's not a universal reaction. The people that love her books love them for the emotional content, but I thought they were dead, just dead. I'm perfectly willing to admit that I was wrong. Pearl Buck could vary. There were no, like I was just mentioning, a book somebody's looking for where I'd say, this is bad, and it's bad for, reason 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you're going to see those reasons, and you're just going to have to overlook them. There's nothing like that in Pearl Buck. Nothing like that at all. It's intelligent. It's efficiently done. It's adventurous in some of its climaxes. It just hasn't worked on me. And usually, if I can say all that about an author, about their books, if I can say all that all of the stuff, all of the tumblers are in place, it just isn't working on me, that's usually my foremost indication that I need to revisit that author at some point. And Pearl Buck is on that list. But as to recommend, right now I can't recommend anything. So maybe you'd be better to talk to me about it than me to you. William Pett says, what are your thoughts on the following mystery writers? Edmund Crispin, I like him. Rex Stout, I don't like him as much as his fans do, but I like him. And James M. Cain, he's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Spaffon #1 says, I realize it doesn't always get the best reviews, but have you or are you going to read Stephen Donaldson's Third Chronicles of Thomas Covenant? Also, what do you think of his non-Covenant novels? Non-Covenant science fiction is terrible. His 2-volume book, Morden's Need, is pretty good, but it suffers from the same problems as so much of the early, like the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, are very much the same cloth as Morden's Need, which is that underneath the surface of a really well done fantasy story, there are all sorts of weird psychosexual things that get less capable of being ignored the further into the 21st century we go. You know, I mock the 21st century's woke, litigious, blue checkmark culture as much as the next free-thinking person. But it's just a weird exaggeration of something that has actually happened that is actually good, which is a raising of our consciousness just generally. Authors can't get away with that kind of self-insertion, sexual wish fulfillment. They can't get away with it anymore. And it was gross whenever they did. So it's good that we're more aware of that. It makes authors work harder for the enjoyment, that sort of thing. It is, this is going to break a lot of hearts out there, but it is a good thing that no mainstream series like the Chronicles of Gore could be written today. That is a good thing. That is not blue checkmark censorship. One way or another, I read the third Chronicles, and I thought they were terrible. Just terrible. And then a long time went by, and then myself and a bunch of other booktubers did a read-along of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. We limped almost all the way to the end, finding lots of fault. I also love rereading some of those books. I enjoy them a lot. The faults were more glaring than ever this time around. And we had made the decision not to read the third trilogy. And I was okay with that, because I had no memories of liking it. But I did wonder if maybe I would see things in them thanks to that read-along that I hadn't seen before. And then the trilogy showed up in hardcover at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. On the inside of the shop, $10 a volume. And I thought, I'm not that curious. I can get them out of the library if I'm that curious. I'm not that curious for the third trilogy. And then that third trilogy ended up in the sale lot next to the Brattle for $5 a piece. And I thought, okay, I'm still not that interested. And then, proving to me that no one else is interested in these books either, they hung around for a long time, and eventually they came out $1 a piece, and I got them. And they're sitting over there, but I haven't read them yet. So that shows you how little motivation I have to get to these things, but I will. I ought to revisit that third trilogy just in case. Let's see here. Andrew Russell says, you are becoming a YouTube megastar. No. Megastar status for BookTube, anyway, would be 20,000. And this channel is never going to get to 20,000 new way. Question number 1. Is there an example of a book in your collection that holds sentimental value, and if so, why? There are a few. Half a dozen. And always the same reason, because of the person who gave it to me. Number 2. How important do you think it is to read examples from the canon in order to develop a broader appreciation of literature? It's incredibly important to read examples from the canon, but not to develop a broad appreciation of literature. It's because they're great. They're fantastic. They're great reading experiences. You have to do some work to meet them halfway, which isn't true for like a new novel, but it's worth it. You do that work and you're going to have a transformative reading experience a lot of times. So greater appreciation of literature sounds like something you put on a job application. You would want to do the work to meet these great canonical works because they're fantastic, because you're generally going to love them. And number 3, what is your favorite drama TV series and why? Do you have any idea how many drama TV series I've watched in my life? It's a huge amount. I admit I like comedies better for series, but I don't know. Is a drama TV series the same thing as sequential series that isn't a comedy? In which case it would be The Adventures of Superman. Yes, Superman. Strange visitor from another planet who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. I don't think you'd call that a drama, though. The list would be enormous. Absolutely enormous. St. Elsewhere would be on that list. MASH would be on that list. Plenty of others. Plenty of dramas. I should make a whole video about TV. Jared McSwain says, we recently saw Bohu Milhrabal and Daniel Okish on your channel. Any other Eastern European writers in a similar vein you recommend? Eastern European starter kit, when? Oh my, I don't think I'm qualified. But Ismail Kadar is amazing. Find his book, The Three Arch Bridge, and read it. You'll be blown away. Just blown away. And everything else he did is almost as good. I think that's his masterpiece, The Three Arch Bridge. But everything else that I've read has been great. Evil Joshu says, what's the best general advice you have for someone with limited time and money to expand their reading horizons? Not just in terms of saving money, but in trying to find more hits than misses. Pardon me for my nefarious double dipping. This is my second posted question. I don't care about double dipping. The best way for someone with limited time and money to increase their hit-miss ratio is to talk to me. I leave my email on every video. I'm on Voxer. You could literally talk to me all day long. I can make sure. I am acutely aware of the fact that most people are up against the wall when it comes to their love of reading, both for monetary reasons, although the internet really removes that. You can find books for a penny if you look in the right place. But there you don't know about quality. But both in terms of money and in terms of time, everybody, even though we've all been quarantined at home, everybody seems to be busier than ever, with no time to scratch out for their own reading. So there's a high premium on that. There's a high premium on things like that, and I'm incredibly aware of that. I respect it, and I want to help. So my foremost piece of advice would be get in touch. You pick up the phone. I'll be happy to help. Let's see here. Hugo Simeo says, let's see here. Number one, what do you think of Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st century, and what are your thoughts on economic inequality? My thoughts on economic inequality has always been with us. The poor are always with you. But you have only for a limited time. But my thoughts on Capital by Piketty, I actually wrote a review of it where I just sent it up. That's all I did was just mock the thing from beginning to end. And again, if I can remember correctly, I will leave a link to that review. It's well worth your time. Steve in high comedy mode doesn't happen often and is great fun. Number two is, are you aware that video game companies restrict critics from talking about some parts of games when they receive advanced copies? What do you think about this practice? Well, I don't know anything about video games or video game criticism except what I learned from Gamergate. What is it that the critics aren't allowed to talk about? I mean, would video game companies would they go to the bother of telling critics that they aren't allowed to give away some sort of big ending? Do video games have big endings? I don't even know. I would understand something like that. Maybe a video game company might do that. But I don't know what kinds of things they're restricting people from talking about, because I don't know is it possible to spoil a video game? I don't even know, one way or another. Certainly The Last of Us 2, there was a big thing that happened in that video game that critics all over the internet were willing to talk about long before it came into stores. So was that spoiling it? I have no idea. Publishers, when they send out review copies of books, don't give any criterion to reviewers. They just assume that the reviewer knows. Don't spoil the book. Don't review it early. Don't do anything like that. I don't know about video game producers, though. No, I have to do a deep dive in YouTube about that. Lee In says, have you ever read the book Real Frank Zappa book by Frank Zappa? What do you think about it and its author? I haven't read it. Don't have any thoughts about the author. Joshua Lung says, given your focus on American new releases, how much of your reading now is in other languages, not translated work? Second question, what are your thoughts on Michael Chabon's books? I love Chabon's books. I think they're great. And I do almost no reading in non-English releases. My beat is American new releases in the genres that I read. It's a wide spectrum of genres, wider than anybody's, I think. And I read a lot in all of those genres. And that takes up a lot of my reading time. Every once in a while, I will show a lack of discipline and I will look at Amazon whatever company just to check and see. And every once in a while when I do that, I try to stop myself from doing that. But every once in a while when I do that, I will see something that has just come out in some other country that I absolutely have to read, especially if I look at it and think, okay, well, if this is a French intellectual and it's a 1,000-page biography, then it's never going to get an English language translation. There's no point in waiting for it. Something like that usually beats my self-control, but I try not to do it because I know that will happen. So it's very, very small, less than 1%, I bet. Maximus Stedich says, do you have any near-death experiences involving wildlife or the greater outdoors that merit being told? If so, do tell. I have plenty of such experiences. Yes, indeed. Once with a shark, a story I've told on this channel before. Once with a baboon, a big male baboon. Plenty of times with poisonous animals, spiders, scorpions, and snakes. Plenty of times. They're not near-death experiences, because those experiences, that venom was never actually going to kill me. Long story there, but true. That none of that venom, none of those venom injections were ever going to kill me, but it still felt like near death. A lot of times it was really bad experiences. Also very close with a tiger on one occasion, and famously a moose. Many bears, many bears in many different parts of the world. I have plenty of stories when it's finally the all clear for all of you to pile over here to Hyde Cottage for wine and calzones. Trust you, I will tell you those stories late into the night, long after you want me to stop. And I can't help but hope that we're getting close to that. I can't help that we're edging close to normal life again. At least in America, the population is edging closer and closer to herd immunity type numbers, and millions and millions of people are being vaccinated. Those are going to have a combined effect. They just are. I would have to hope that we are maybe looking at a summer when we can relax a little outside. That would be great. Let's see here. Justin Raymond says, "Hey Steve, if you knew you were about to die and you had time to read one last book, what would it be?" I would not read. Under such a circumstance, I would write. It's just possible, theoretically, that I have been in that situation, and the urge that comes upon you, and that should come upon you in that moment, is to write. Write. Get yourself out into the world in a non-perishable way, now that you know the rest of you is going to perish. And all that I want to say about that moment is that you're in that moment right now, whether you feel it or not. The perishable you is going to perish. You should be writing. You should be writing. Especially since you live in an era that actually has as one of its mottos, the internet never forgets. That shouldn't be used as a threat. That's a wonderful promise. Okay, you know that. Write. Get the stuff that only you can put out into the world before you shuffle off, before you drop off the twig, before you pop your clogs. Do that today. But anyway, I wouldn't read. I would write. I probably wouldn't even write, because I've done a huge amount of writing. I've already made a bit of an empire, a bit of an imprint. I am out there in the world. I know that I have a body of writing that will survive me. Maybe scattershot, but that will. I ought to have a book. I know that. I should have a couple by now. But I at least know that there's writing out there that will live beyond me, and that conveys me. In a sense, it conveys me. In other words, it's not dead. It's not just procedural manuals. It conveys my voice. It conveys my personality. So I would probably spend that time cuddling with the bean. Let's see here. Nicholas Lassithiotakis says, number 1, how long until there is a William Howard Taft biography that does justice to the hilarious bathtub incident? The bathtub incident didn't happen. It would be great if the next big William Howard Taft book doesn't even mention it, much less try to do justice to it. There is no hilarious bathtub incident. It didn't happen. It's the only thing I ever hear about. God help us. I researched Taft for years to write a book about him. And when I would tell people that's what I was doing, the first word out of their mouth was bathtub. First word. The only thing they know about him. Anyway. Number 2, please tell your Margaret George story. Well, it's not that unusual a story. Like I mentioned in an earlier Q&A here, I was the person that my managers trotted out to sit with an author when they were at a table doing a signing at the bookstore. Those of you who've worked in retail bookstores will know sometimes you don't get a crowd. Sometimes the author has downtime. And this was when I was doing this was before the era of cell phones, and when most authors came in without an entourage. So they were just sitting there on their own. You wanted somebody from the store to be there too, in case somebody came up. You don't want somebody to come up and ask the author where the bathroom is. You want to be right there to step in. And my managers quickly realized that interaction goes a lot better if the person can talk books with the author, especially their own books. So I was there with Margaret George, wonderfully friendly author. We were talking about her books, and she mentioned that she was working on a book about Cleopatra, Antony and Cleopatra, and I mentioned she mentioned that there was a source of hers, an original source that just didn't read right to her. It just didn't feel right, and I said, well, you leave me your address. I'll be happy to translate it for you myself and take you through why I made the choices that I did. And maybe that'll help you with finding the translation by somebody else that you like. And she did do that, and we corresponded for a bit. And when her Cleopatra book came out, the acknowledgement section, where an author typically thanks people, had everybody's name in the world. In the world. Hairdressers, house cleaners, second cousins twice removed. Everybody in the world. Including a thanks to her pet snake. And no mention of me. None whatsoever. Not even a cloaked mention. No mention of me. And that became the butt of a joke at my Barnes & Noble because the staff realized that she had thanked everybody but the kitchen sink, including her pet snake. So for a while, I was Snake Boy. I would say I don't know why the staff jumped at every opportunity to make fun of me, but I kind of know. It's because I made fun of them a lot more than they made fun of me. People used to say, people who were new to the store, new hires, whether they're managers or workers, used to say, boy, you people are really hard on Steve. And I would be the first to say, I would say, well, you know, I should say it before anybody else does, but they really deserve it. They take a lot worse than they're giving, believe you me. But anyway, where are we here? Oh, right. That was your second question. And the third question, could one of you, my beloved subscribers, send me, Steve, the new Norton Critical edition of the Tale of Genji by Dennis Washburn? Is the Washburn translation finally out? I've been watching for this Norton Critical edition, but if the Norton Critical edition of the Tale of Genji in the Washburn translation has come out already, why hasn't Norton sent it to me? I don't have it, and I want it. Am I blurbed on it? Has anybody seen it? Am I actually blurbed on a Norton Critical edition? What a thrill that would be. It'd be only the second time it's ever happened. Now I have to go online and look. Is the Norton Critical edition of Tale of Genji actually available? Does it actually exist? If so, me wanty. OMG. All right, well, that question raises more questions than it answers. Let's go on to Blue Sky. Number one, have you worked on a novel, a new project or past project this year? Oh, don't remind me. I did Camp NaNoWriMo in April, but in some of you might, if you watch my videos, you might know that I was feeling really poorly at the early part of April, and I dropped Camp NaNoWriMo. By the time I was feeling good enough to do extra writing in the day, I was so far behind. I know Camp NaNoWriMo doesn't have hard and fast word limits, but I was so far behind that I just dropped the project. It's the first time I've ever done that. And it's been such a source of shame for me that I haven't gone back to anything yet. If so, how is that process going? What can you share about the novel? Well, I can't. I don't have any such thing now. I'm gradually, slowly working on two projects with two other people, but they're not fiction. They're nonfiction. Number two, would you be open to doing writing advice videos from the point of view of an avid reader, professional reviewer, such as elements that create strong versus weak writing that you could believe could help new writers? Well, I've done some writing videos on this channel. I always feel a little bit odd doing them since I'm not a published author in the traditional sense. I am published a lot. I'm published a lot. My work has appeared in print in front of a reading audience an enormous amount for a very long time. But it's book reviews. It's published book reviews and op-eds. It's not books. And it always feels like a little bit presumptuous of me to give writing advice videos. I guess, I know some of you will say there are plenty of writing advice videos out there from people who don't have any publication credits to their name at all, of any kind. And some of you will say, some of you have said to me in response to this objection that, well, you know, the fact that you've been a critic for so long actually extra qualifies you to talk about writing, not disqualifies you. So maybe I should do that. I often feel like I'm terribly neglecting AuthorTube. I'll have to think about that. That's probably a good idea. A regular writing videos are probably a good idea. Matt Crash says, at risk of asking a question about a potentially broad subject, could you recommend any books on Catholic philosophy? Potentially broad subject. You mean there's a chance it's not broad? That's a whole video on its own. If you're interested in Catholic philosophy, I assume by that you mean theology, I would suggest the Catechism. There are popular paperbacks of the Catholic Catechism that you can buy and read, and that parts of it make good reading. But that's a whole video on its own. I could make a long list. Alan Black says, my question is, in your old background, there has always been a book in the background that had a dinosaur's tail on it. I've always been curious as to what this book is. I have no idea at all. I couldn't even hazard a guess. I've had many backgrounds. I couldn't even hazard a guess. Harrison Recht says, number one, what are your thoughts on Winston Churchill's multi-volume works such as his Histories of World War II and English-speaking peoples. They can be very good reading, whoever wrote them. Number 2, would you recommend Thomas Mann's behemoth Joseph and His Brothers as worth the time to read? Yes. Very much so, yes. I've heard you hardly recommend The Magic Mountain, so I was interested to hear how this novel stacks up against his others, since I've never personally met anyone who has read it. It's very good. You're in for the long haul, and it doesn't read anything like Buddenbrooks or Magic Mountain, but it is very good, yes. Doom Antidote says, is there a video or series of videos that you're particularly proud of making? Do you ever go back and watch any of your old videos? I only go back and watch old videos if I'm looking for something that I know I've addressed in a video. I don't just go back like Norma Desmond, just, oh, wasn't I great? Oh, wasn't this fantastic? I go back if I'm looking for something. Otherwise, no. And particularly proud of, I've never really understood that. Or rather, I do understand it, and I don't think it applies to me. You hear this question all the time in BookTube Q&As when people say, what videos are you most proud of? And that makes it sound like the videos are a studio production. Like they're an artificial production of some kind, right? You would never go to someone and say, looking back in the last 10 years, what personal conversations, in parks or bars or restaurants with friends of yours are you most proud of? You wouldn't ask that. It wouldn't even compute because they're not performances. And I don't view these videos as performances. So there's hardly anything that I could use in that term. I think a lot of them are interesting. I'd hope that a lot of them are interesting, but proud of? I don't go back and look at things that way, no. Jenny Park says, do you have any authors that bypass your TBR queue and get read instantly when they arrive? I try not to. I very much try not to, because my TBR is arranged in chronological order in a way that means something not only to my publication schedule down the line, but also to my bank account. So I try not to. I can think of a handful of people. If a new Meg book came out by Steve Alton, I would probably drop everything to read it. If Dermot McCullough comes out with a great big new book, what if Dermot McCullough writes a 1,000-page biography of Erasmus in 2 years? Of course, I'm going to drop everything to read that. So but I try not to because it throws a spanner in the works. Is there an update on your super hottie mail boy? He's gone. He's long gone. The mailman that works my route now has gone back to being the guy who had it before. He's just really friendly, loves Frida, but the sultry mail boy is gone. Nobody knows anything about him. It's like I dreamed him. Except he took a book of mine. And how many unread books on your Kindle is too many? I'm currently at 1,200. 1,200? I think I have 3 unread NetGalley books on my Kindle. Because my NetGalley account sends the books straight to my Kindle account. So it shows up on the RadPad and all the other iPads. But I read them. I don't just let them sit there. The ones that aren't there are long. They're way down the line. They're like late summer releases. Actually, let's stop there and we'll go on.